back a bit to the act of grace. You said that you had an opening into God. What happened for you?
Well, it's a very, it's one of these things that, Cheryl, when you put into words, it diminishes, and I've tried many times, and I'll do my best with this. So bear with me a little bit, because it was very personal and very powerful, but I hadn't been to synagogue in many, many, many years, and finally I found myself one Friday night that I wanted to go. I hadn't been in years and years, and I found a synagogue nearby, and I walked in, really not knowing why I was there and what I was doing there. I just felt I needed to go. And I walked in, I sat in the back, wondering, why am I here, and this is all silly. And they started to sing this beautiful little, what's called a nigun, a wordless melody. And something about that captured me, and I listened, and I thought this was very nice. And the music continued, and people filtered in, and they started singing some more, and that sense of this ancientness, it increased in that moment. And I really found myself thinking, well, maybe there's something to this after all. And I sat back and I started looking at the people around me. And suddenly I experienced them in a way that I never had experienced people before. I mentioned the kind of connection I had to art, where I could hear the voice of the artist speaking to me through the canvas. Mm-hmm. Suddenly these people became intensely vivid for me, and that shield that we all have around ourselves that defends ourselves and separates ourselves and tells us who we are and who we're not and how we're different from other people started to dissolve. And I felt this intense connection and love for these people around me. And again, this is going to sound very mystical and strange, but and I started to cry in the back of the synagogue at this beauty that I never knew existed in other human beings. And suddenly everything became very vivid for me. I could see this woman in front of me. I'll never forget. I could see every one of the strands on her hair, and every one of them was gorgeous, as was she. And suddenly the synagogue filled with this silvery light. The whole light changed, and I didn't know what was happening. And I felt an embrace around me. And I suddenly, as I was crying kind of softly to myself, I simply said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the mistakes I've made, for the cruel things I've done, for the insensitivities that I've done, for not being as good a father as my kids need me to be, although I was a good father. And I thought, who am I saying this to? And I experienced, I'm not going to say a voice because it isn't that way, but I experienced a response that said, I forgive you. And this embrace around me and the light increased. And I felt an endless sense of love at this moment. And the message to me was, I love you, but you must change. And at that moment I said, I promise I will. And I've kept that promise ever since. And so at that moment, where I was an atheist before, that I thought the notion of God as the anthropomorphic notion that I knew was silly and archaic. Suddenly I experienced it in a way that was totally real to me, and that was believable. And my passion, the 15 years since that, is to communicate that possibility and that reality to other people and its transformative qualities. And since then, my career has taken off. My kids, thank God. My whole life changed in every way for the better.